Welcome back to another episode of Bible Conversations. Today we're going to be talking about outreach with a future movie director. All right, welcome back. We are excited to have another guest on with us this week. Jake Hand, he just graduated from high school. He's been a member of our youth group here at Keller for many years, and he's moving on to bigger and better things, moving on to adulthood. So, Jake, go ahead and introduce yourself to all of our listeners and tell them just something a little about you.
Well, I think you gave a pretty good introduction yourself, but yeah, my name is Jake Hand. I am just about to graduate from high school. I've been taking a lot of audiovisual classes during my time in high school, and so now I'm ready to go into college and basically try to become a director. Yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk about today is your talents and your abilities and how you're wanting to use that for God and His kingdom, which is so awesome because in the age that we live in with technology, like that is a huge way to reach people. There's so many people that can be reached through film, through movies. So
yeah, it's huge. And I think the bad part is people haven't really been taking advantage of it. I don't think enough just in the Christian world because number one, we're kind of limited to just a lot of things in the industry. Mm-hmm. Kind of like funding is kind of hard to get a lot of the time, just because usually Christian studios are smaller. Yeah. A lot of the time.
Because the secular studios don't want to fund a Christian film.
Right.
And then other Christians who would typically help fund Christian films are like, oh, well, Hollywood, I don't know if I want to support that. You know?
Exactly. So, yeah, it's kind of a two-way thing. It's just it's really hard sometimes. I mean, it's not even the funding half the time. It's just like, yeah, like a lot of the people, a lot of like the big people in Hollywood are like, no, we don't want to let these people get their influence in here at all, even though, you know, they're pushing other things all the time now. But it's kind of a double standard.
Yeah.
Well, that's unfortunately, buddy, that is the way of life. Yes. A lot of things are double standards, and a lot of people are going to, say, well, we're not going to allow you to push your agenda, but they've got their own that they're pushing, right? And so, we'd be foolish to say that we don't have an agenda. We do. We want people to become Christian, right? Like that is certainly what we want to do. And so we have the gospel that we want to teach people and that we want to talk about. And so I've got a couple questions for you, but I think we'll start with just your film. I think, Dylan, you've got a couple questions first. So I'll let you start and then I'll come in after.
Yeah. So I probably know a whole lot more than our listeners do about like the direction of film that you want to go. So why don't you share a little bit about like how you want to be the next Spielberg and be a huge director of blockbuster movies, but the Christian version. Okay. So like what are some of the future plans that you have as far as how you're going to go about that?
Yeah. So I really want to I want to make it big, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, it's going to be really hard to do as a Christian, but I'm going to try to push the standard. Basically, I'm going to try to make a bunch of movies, if not maybe start off with just short films about all these Bible stories, because I think the potential is pretty much limitless in the Bible. And just like I said earlier, people haven't been taking advantage of it either. The best example I can think of right now is The Chosen, and even that has a few things wrong with it. But it's also kind of hard to say there's things wrong with it because there's so many denominations now to where it's like you're not going to be able to get everything right for everybody. So
and they do take some artistic liberties.
Exactly.
Well, that's awesome. And so I think your plans for right now are to go to TCC, or is it North Texas?
So TCC for now.
Okay.
They have a bunch of good film classes in I think it's the Northeast campus. So I'm going to do a few classes there, but then I'm going to try to go to UNT or maybe another nearby film school because I know like they have really good film classes. So that's my plan.
Awesome. And, as far as tying this back into the Bible, because that's what we do with everything, but when we're talking about this and talking about the career that you've chosen and what you're setting out to do, it really reminds me of 1 Corinthians chapter 9. When Paul is talking to the church in Corinth, and starting in verse 24, he says, "Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain it. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself may be disqualified." And this is, I think, something that Chris was alluding to, that you got to make sure that you don't let the world influence you in Hollywood. You got to make sure that you are being cautious of your own steps so that you may be effective for other people. And Paul kind of goes back to that just in the passage right before this, when he says, we'll start in verse 22, just a few verses up. He says, "To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings." And so he's got to relate to them, but not let the world get in him, right?
Yes, exactly. So I think that is really good. And so when I was actually in school, I've actually thought of those verses before, and it really can be hard. And that was just me in school. So I can't even imagine how it's going to be when I try to make it big, right? Especially if you want to make it big, you have to have a lot of connections, and to build those bridges with people, especially if you're a Christian, is going to be very, very difficult to do. So yes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm reminded a little bit of Galatians chapter 6, and not necessarily for the same reason that I normally am, but there's a certain portion of Galatians 6:1 that I think applies certainly to obviously what Paul's talking about, but also to what we're talking about today. He says, "Brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness." Okay, well, that's good. Doesn't really apply to what we're talking about right now. But then he says, "Keep watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted." Right? And so your purpose in sharing the Christian stories is to do what? To bring people to Christ, right?
Yep.
Like, that's your purpose. And so you are trying, in a sense, to restore people, to bring people to Christ. And what Paul says is, keep watch on yourself, right? Lest you be tempted. And so one of my questions, I had a buddy in college. She was a friend of mine, friend of my wife's, and she took a film class while she was in school. And the teacher assigned certain films they had to watch. This is 4th grade. You must watch this in order to pass. And so she went back to the professor and she said, "Listen, I'm a Christian. Is there any way I can watch these on ClearPlay? Where I can get rid of some of the language, maybe some of the nudity, some of the stuff that I don't want to see because I don't want it influencing who I am." And the professor came back like a day or so later and said, "No. The directors made this a certain way. You must watch this the way that they made it, because that is how it is supposed to be watched." And so she had to watch them the way that they were in order to pass that class. Wow. So my question for you is, going into school where you are at the influence and you are at the you're in subjection to your professors. How will you handle things like that? At what points are you going to be able to stand firm and hold true to the gospel? And at what points are you going to not necessarily get away from the gospel, but what are you going to be able to let slide?
Right. So, yeah, that is a really difficult situation. And that's a great example of the double standard, because I don't even know how you're allowed to do that anymore, especially with the whole respecting religion thing for everybody,
I
all
think
the
he
equality.
just called you old. He's like, back when you were in school, they did that.
Yeah, he did call me old. That's all right.
But no, so yeah, I mean, I use ClearPlay. I use VidAngel for everything I watch as well. It's not going to really change the way you see a movie. I mean, if anything, it's just going to make it better for you. So I understand where your friend was coming from. But, yeah, so if it comes down to that, there is going to be a limit. If I was in that situation, I would just
Would you just watch it on Clear Play and not tell them?
Yeah.
Because that would then you get into another problem of now you've lied.
Now you lied, yeah.
Right.
It's hard because
it's a tough decision.
That's why I always like to ask for forgiveness instead of permission, right? I'm kidding.
I was about to say, Dylan. But no. I think what I would do is I would not watch it. I would just try to talk to that person as much as I can, try to convince them, because I think that's the best option.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything bad. You're just trying to resolve the conflict. If that doesn't go well, I would take it to leadership in the school. And if they don't slide, then that's where I'm just going to have to basically be like, I'm sorry, I have to drop this class. This goes against my beliefs. So, yeah.
Fair enough. It's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to do. But that's one of the I think problems you're going to run into as you get into the realm of Hollywood, right? It's a whole different animal, right? It's a whole different world. And so, you've got to be ready for that. Alyssa and I were talking last night. We heard the topic of the podcast and we're like, okay, well, what are some things that we might be able to ask? Well, you look at some of the commercials today, right? And you've got a sock commercial like Hanes socks, and they're showing like full body, like they're in like it's bras, crazy. Panties, and socks.
It's crazy.
And it's like, why?
It's like for a sock commercial.
For what purpose are we showing all of this skin for something that covers skin up, right? Like, why are we doing so there's all sorts of different things that I don't know that you've necessarily thought of, and you may have. But just to be ready for is as you get into this, I think what you're wanting to do is absolutely admirable. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I agree. I think there is a market for Christian media. And after the podcast, we can talk. I've got some ideas on where you might be able to go for that. But anyway, there's a lot of things to consider and a lot of ways in which you can also fall short, and where you can really even fall away. And so this is one of those times where keep guard on yourself, right?
Yes.
Lest you too be tempted.
There was one other thing I wanted to share as we're going along this line of thinking of, there's a lot of worldly things that are going to be around you that are going to be trying to infiltrate your life. And it honestly reminds me of Jesus when he was in his ministry. Looking in Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 10, it says, "And Jesus reclined." Let's start back in verse 9. "As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, 'Follow me.' And he rose and followed him." So this is Jesus calling Matthew to follow him. And then in verse 10, "And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples." Now, this is when Jesus is just called Matthew. He's a tax collector. And he's associating with a lot of sinful people. A lot of times when it just says tax collectors and sinners, sometimes that lends us to understand it's prostitutes. But Scripture will sometimes clean it up and just say sinners rather than prostitutes. But then in verse 11, "And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, 'Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?' But when he heard it, he said, 'Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners.'" And I think this is something that you have to keep in mind as well, is that, in order to be effective in reaching people, we can't completely slam the door on them and say, "I'm not going to associate with you. I'm not going to have anything to do with you, but I want you to listen to what I have to say. But once I'm done talking, all right, I'm going to leave you behind and not pay any more attention to you." And so it's definitely a difficult thing to balance, a matter of being in their lives, associating with them, but not by means of showing them that you're tolerant of sin, but in order to connect with them and relate with them so that we can help them see that there's a better way, you know?
Yeah, there's definitely a fine line between, say when you're doing mission work, maybe with somebody that's a different religion. Yeah, there's a fine line between well, you got to do what you're trying to set out to do, but you also don't want to be too pushy in the process. So you got to find that happy medium.
Well, it's this idea of, all right, so you think of people who go to bars all the time, right? Mm-hmm. They probably are not, coming to church on Sundays, right? They're probably not living a life that is glorifying to God, right? So
can't believe you would make that assumption.
Wow. Never mind. So you've got these people who are in need of, just as we are, who are in need of Christ, mm-hmm. right? And so what's a logical conclusion? Well, you go to them, right? And so it's this idea of, okay, do we go to the bar in order to convert people, or do we try to find them outside of that and help them through it, right? And so there is a fine line of, what's acceptable in your life, mm-hmm. right? And what's not. And how do you then tell people, man, I can't be a part of that. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to go to that party. I'm not going to do this because of this. But I still would like to hang out with you. Maybe we can go get lunch, right? Maybe we go get coffee. We do something, right?
Exactly.
So there's ways around it, but it's hard, and it's going to require you to say no.
And that is why it is so important just to study, try to just do it every day, pray.
Yeah.
Basically do everything just
Be
with God.
Word.
Be in the Word.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important. And it's not just, going into the film industry. It's pretty much in a Christian's life, it's in everything we do. That's why it's so vital that we do stay in His Word, because this will build us.
Well, it is our life. It's not a part of our life,
That's
right?
True.
Like film is going to be a part of your life.
Right.
Yeah.
Christianity is your life, right?
Well,
I have been
point,
crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So, and I think that's the mistake that some people make, is that they make Christianity a part of the whole being their normal life, when the reality is Christianity has to be the whole, and everything else that fits in there is the part of your life.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way of saying it.
And it's not just, in the profession that you've chosen. We have a lot of other seniors that have just graduated, whether it's some of the girls going off into nursing. They're going to deal with the exact same thing with the people that they're around. Even one of our high school girls, she's going to be a school teacher. Boy, how do you better believe that she's going to deal with the same kind of thing in school when she graduates college and goes off to be a teacher. And so it's in every part of everybody's life. One thing I find really interesting about this story of Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners, a lot of people like to use this passage to say, see, look at Jesus. He went to eat with tax collectors and sinners, and showing them that He loves them, that He's tolerant of them, that it's okay that they have sin. And that's absolutely not true. First of all, Jesus didn't eat with tax collectors and sinners. They ate with Jesus. Look at what it says in verse 10. And Jesus reclined at the table in His house, talking about Matthew. Jesus is called Matthew. Jesus goes to Matthew's house. Behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus. They came to Jesus. Jesus didn't go to them. So that's the first thing, is that He's got the type of personality. He's got the type of authority that people are drawn to. But then secondly is every time that Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners, they aren't sinners when they leave. The reason that Jesus is with them, at all, is so that they can make a change in their life. Not to say, hey, I love you anyways, but to inspire them to something better.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned one thing about studying and praying, right? And so remind me of one of my favorite verses from the Old Testament, Joshua 1:8. And this is the Lord really speaking to Joshua. He says, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success." And so this book that I'm holding, that nobody can see except for you two, is the Bible. This is what our lives are based on. This is what our lives center around, is God's word and God's will. And I think wherever you go and whatever you do, if you make this the center of your life, you're going to be successful. Maybe not in a worldly sense, but you will be successful and you will be prosperous in the things that truly matter.
Yeah. So like when you said, make it your whole life.
Yeah.
That is really good because I just think that if you do that, then, well, first of all, there are some people who will claim to be Christian, but yet in certain instances in their life, they will basically just have a switch. Mm-hmm. They're just not Christian.
Yeah.
It's just anytime they're outside of church,
they can turn it
just
on
changes.
And off. Yeah.
Basically, they're just conformed easily to try to fit in, and basically we got to do the opposite. We got to be, the shining light into the world. Yeah. So when you make it your whole life, well, I mean, there's not going to be a switch for you. So that's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. I have one more question for you. I don't know if Chris has got anything else.
I'm good.
But it's kind of a big picture question, so it might take you a little bit to think. But in your mind, if you could accomplish like the most things, if everything that you set out to do was accomplished, what does your future look like?
So what does my future look like after I accomplish these things?
No, like what are the things that you've accomplished? Give me some examples of like, hey, this is what it's going to look like if I reach the point that I'm striving for.
If I reach the point I'm striving for,
so like I'm talking like number 1 box office hit, like more than Infinity War, what are your
now
goals?
It's more than Avatar: Way of Water.
Oh man, yeah, that's true.
Did that really? Oh, that's disappointing because I like Marvel a lot better.
I think they're both great. Anyway,
but yeah, man, I'm hoping to make my whole cinematic universe in the Bible. Like make like a whole like Infinity War type finale where like all like the prophets come together. I don't know.
Dude, the BCU, the Biblical Cinematic Universe.
Oh man. But sorry. Anyways. But yeah, I know it's not probable, but man, what I really hope to do is actually be on the same line as like all the greats. Okay. Like Scorsese, Spielberg, Christopher Nolan. He's my favorite director. I like those mind-bending movies. Director. Those are great. So I want to be like on par with them, and it's going to be so difficult. But I really hope that I can make these huge hits, and to where that gets people thinking like, oh, I've never, like, some people might not even heard of these Bible stories, even though they're super popular. Like some people probably haven't even heard of them. And then that is like one of like the greatest ways you could reach people through entertainment.
Yep.
So, I mean,
because a lot of these Old Testament stories are incredibly entertaining.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you just have to bring them to life and put them on screen.
Some of them are terrifying too.
Terrifying, right? Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, like earlier, like the potential really is limitless. Like if you think about it, these Bible stories are so awesome. So, like, I think people would like really, really enjoy seeing them, and it would make them think like, maybe I should, check more of this Bible out,
I think Saul going to see the medium at Endor, like that could be a really
that was actually the first thing I thought of too.
Scary film, right? Like, so anyway.
And if you think about it, 95% of pop culture is actually based off of Bible stories. Just look up any popular movie, and look up biblical undertones, biblical
you look at
allegories.
Star Wars, man. Like Star Wars is literally the Messiah. Like that's what they have made, right? So
the chosen
one.
You've got Luke Skywalker was born of a virgin. He was born in a desert place.
Skywalker
is Anakin.
Yeah,
I thought it was Luke. No. Luke's the dad. Whatever. Anakin was born of a virgin, right? He was he was born on a world, and then he
nothing good comes from Tatooine.
Nothing good, right? He goes out, he finds the Force, he saves the world, right? Like all of this stuff. There's so many parallels that they make to Christianity, and you look. I mean, Avatar. We just talked about Avatar. Avatar is a very similar thing.
Yeah,
there are so many undertones of Christianity that you can find in so many different films, and people don't want to talk about that. People don't even want to talk about the fact that BC or AD, right? Mm-hmm. BC meaning before Christ, AD meaning Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, that's where we get It's what we have our years based on, right?
Exactly.
Christianity has affected, Jesus Christ has affected the world in so many ways. And I think it's just so interesting.
Yeah, everybody knows that this year is 2023. That goes all the way back to Jesus. Like that's how that number started being counted.
Yeah.
God and the Bible's influence is literally everywhere.
Yep.
If you think about it.
It is.
And it's so sad that like some people just don't see it or don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Well, they actively choose not to.
Yeah.
Some people actively do.
Yeah.
So here's the reason I asked what your like the best of the best, like the picture in your mind that like, hey, if everything worked out, this is what I imagine. This is what I imagine accomplishing. I've shared this with you before. I know I've shared this with the podcast before, but I want to bring it up again because I think it applies so well here. But Ephesians chapter 3, starting in verse 14, Paul writes to the church in Ephesus, "For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being." So God is going to strengthen us with power through his Spirit. God's Spirit is going to be working in our lives. He's going to be working for us. He's going to be helping us. And then let's go ahead and jump down to verse 20. It says, "Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all that we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations forever and ever. Amen." God has the power to do more in your life than you can even imagine. This picture that you can create in your mind, like it seems like, oh my word, if he can be like on par with Spielberg and Christopher Nolan, and God's like, that's all you want? It's like
that's it.
He's like that's all you can imagine. He can accomplish more in your life. He can reach more people. He can tell his own story, because this Bible is God's story, his love letter to humanity. He can tell his story through you in better ways than you can even imagine. Here's the most important part. It's his Spirit working through you. As long as you let his power and his ability to work in your life, and as long as you stay in him, then he can accomplish more than any of us can ever imagine. And it's not because you are a great movie director, and Jake, you're going to be a great movie director, but it's because if you stay with God, he's going to say, yes, I can use you and use your talents and use your abilities to accomplish more things and to reach more people than you can even imagine right now. And this is something that I love sharing with the teens. The example I always give our teens at the beginning of each year is, set out some goals for this next year. If your goal is like, hey, I'm going to bring 5 friends to church, then God's like, that's all? Like he can do so much more as long as we let his power work in our lives. If we try to do it by our own power, then we're not going to reach anything. But if we're working by God's power and letting him work in our lives, then it's going to blow us away. And sometimes it looks differently. Sometimes what he accomplishes is more than we imagine, but down a different path. And we get there 10 years later and we're like, this is way more than I imagined, but it doesn't look at all how I expected it to look. And so it's incredible the way God works. He works in mysterious ways, but he works in wonderful ways.
Yeah, it's like really inspiring too. It's like, man, I just got to one up myself every time.
Yeah.
Just God's going to be with me along the way. So yeah, it's good.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Jake, is there anything else you want to add?
I just hope you guys support me. Go to all my movies. Be like, get the early screenings, get everything. So I hope to see you guys. Oh wow! I hope to see you guys in the theater in about 20 years.
Yeah,
I look forward to the awesome stuff you do, man. It's going to be great.
All right. Well, I think you can close this out.
Thank y'all so much for listening. As always, just stick around a few more minutes so you can hear how you can help us out.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Bible Conversations. We want to ask if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments that you please email us at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We've got a Facebook page as well as an Instagram account. Our Facebook page is very simple. It's just Bible Conversations. On Instagram, it's very simple, at Bible Conversations. Look us up, like our posts, and share it with your friends.
We also have an opportunity for you to help us financially through a store via Kim's Closet, and you can find that. You can just type into Google Kim's Closet. We have a link as well that we will be posting in each of our episodes, and we just hope that you'll reach out and find us and purchase a hoodie or a shirt with the logo on it, and that way you can spread the word without having to say a word. So we appreciate you. Thank you all. Have a blessed week.